The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've been talking all week about what's been happening in Baltimore after the very strange death of Freddie Gray, a African-American 25-year-old who was arrested by police for having a switchblade and then ended up with his spinal cord 80% severed, coming out of emergency surgery in a coma and ultimately dying. Protests raging, mostly nonviolent, mostly peaceful, with some violence, looting, and all of the malicious criminality that tends to sort of become a hanger-on when we see these types of uprisings. We now have a new assertion, and some people are emailing me saying, David, this is the most insane explanation I've ever heard, which is that there is a sealed police document citing an anonymous witness suggesting that Freddie Gray severed his own spinal cord by deliberately hurting himself. This is belying credulity for many people. There's a prisoner who has reportedly shared the police transport van with Freddie Gray, who reportedly said to investigators that he could hear Gray banging against the walls of the vehicle and believed that he was intentionally trying to injure himself. This is according to a police document obtained by the Washington Post. That prisoner is currently in jail, did not actually see anything that Gray did, was separated from Gray by a metal partition, could not see him at all. His statement is in an application for a search warrant, which is sealed by the court, which was given to the Washington Post under the condition that the prisoner not be named because of concerns around his safety. The document in question was reportedly written by a Baltimore police investigator, and it is maybe the first glimpse at an explanation as to what happened. How is it that we had an arrest that, according to Baltimore police, involved no incident or no force and led to a man with an 80% severed spinal cord ultimately dying after entering a coma after emergency surgery? Does this change things at all? Could this drastically change things? The person in question didn't see it, and it's cited in a court document that is sealed, given under the condition that the person who saw it supposedly is never going to actually be named. I understand the skepticism, Lewis. A guy who was in the transport van severed his own spinal cord, and nobody actually saw it, and the document is a secret.
If this is true, it would change anything, but how do we prove that? I mean, first of all, it seems like sustaining the damage he sustained, that seems like a very difficult thing to do to yourself, especially when you're handcuffed.
It does seem very difficult to me. And the report is contradicted by what the Baltimore police commissioner said about the statement of the other prisoner in the van 6 days ago. Jane Miller from WBAL reported on Twitter, Baltimore Police Department Commissioner Anthony Batts says second prisoner in van with Freddie Gray reports no erratic driving by van driver and Gray mostly quiet. At the same time, there's a CBC article which contradicts the contradiction, which said that actually the other man in the van did report that there was some kicking and making noises all the way up until the point that the van arrived at the station. If that is true, then that's a new narrative, Lewis, which is actually the damage was not sustained in the van because the guy was clearly making noise all the way up until the van got to the station. The damage was suffered, I guess, from the time at which they got to the station and when Freddie Gray was brought inside. I mean, every single one of these stories, by definition, asserts a different scenario.
And I think it's still possible that perhaps he sustained this damage before even getting into the van, right?
Right, of course. It's possible that the damage was done by police or someone else, or we don't know how, and that it did happen before even getting into the van. No question about it.
So I don't think this is going to change anything because there's just not enough information. Nothing is certain. It's interesting to think about, but is this going to have any effect on what's happening in Baltimore? I doubt it.
And broad strokes, Lou, if I were to come to you and say, hey, Lewis, we don't have to worry about what happened to Eddie Gray because there's a sealed police document.
Freddie Gray.
Freddie Gray. What did I say? Freddie Gray. If I say, hey, don't worry about Freddie Gray, everything was on the up and up because a sealed police document citing an anonymous witness who didn't actually see anything says Freddie Gray injured himself. Would you be, oh, okay, that's fine, yeah.
Exactly. That's the problem. It seems pretty meaningless at the moment.
The NRA is already lying about what's happening in Baltimore. Among the many reports that are coming out of Baltimore, there's one from Justin Fenton of the Baltimore Sun, who is already in a very unusual situation. The other day, Fenton was confronted by some angry and aggressive protesters. And according to the NRA's version of the story, Fenton's life was saved when a virtuous, gun-toting business owner intervened. The NRA plastered this all over their Facebook page to their 4.1 million followers. And they said, Baltimore Sun reporter saved from mob by store owner armed with shotgun, as reported by Breitbart. And the NRA just absolutely ran with it. Unfortunately, Lewis, the reality is not what the NRA and Breitbart want us to believe. Justin Fenton actually said, no, that's not what happened. Quote, a group of gang members surrounded me, saying they were protecting me. The guy with the shotgun was just protecting his own business, not really helping the NRA here.
Not helping the NRA, but here you have someone who was able to protect their business with a gun. So maybe it still somewhat fits the NRA narrative.
Except for the fact that the actual protectors, the actual providers of safety to Justin Fenton were the same individuals that make up the very small group of people that the NRA doesn't think should actually have guns. That's what's so fascinating about it.
Right. The group of people that the NRA is talking about when scaring everyone else into buying guns.
Right. This guy was protected by those who are the reason you should have guns, according to the NRA. What a it's a gong show, isn't it? I mean, it's just this blatant attempt to frame everything just perfectly into this obviously false narrative that the NRA has tried to craft for decades now.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, but it's successful. They've had a very successful fear-mongering campaign because, like we've discussed before, gun sales over the past maybe 5 years have been quite good.
Oh, yeah, they're very good at it. If it feels truthy, then it's going to get shared. If it's a story involving the supposed defense of people by guns, not gang members, though. Definitely not gang members. It's got to be, the business owner who pulled himself up by the bootstraps.
Yeah, and if there are business owners out there protecting themselves with guns against gang members with guns, you need to be sure that as a patron of that business, you have a gun. There could be gang members on the outside that want to get you, the store owner on the inside who will get you. Basically, everyone needs to have a gun.
Hey, we've been very critical of Dr. Phil, talk show host Dr. Phil McGraw, and he rarely says things that really make me think he knows what he's talking about. We've talked about how he hasn't actually been a licensed counselor for a long time, although he does play one on television. He went on Fox News and he schooled Fox News, Lewis, about the realities of the American dream and everybody has the same chance to succeed and blah, 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 blah. You know that thing, Lewis, that they do on Fox News. He went on there and he just said, no, you guys don't really know what you're talking about. I'm going to play this for you. They were trying to argue on Fox News that everybody has the same chance of success. Everybody is in the same circumstances around the country, and success merely depends on how much you want to succeed. And Dr. Phil McGraw astutely asserting, no, that's not the case. Let's watch.
Legitimately are upset. There's all kinds of people out there.
Dr. Phil, you usually deal with one-on-one. You're dealing with here in a family one-on-one. When you look at this is like the fourth major inner city uprising. And we keep saying, where's the character? Where are the parents? Where's the opportunity? Where are the role models? How long are we going to keep saying, where are they? And what can be done to change this? Because those kids have the same potential as your kids and our kids.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure they may have the same potential, but I'm not sure they have the same opportunities. Because the fact is the school system is not necessarily the same. The resources are not necessarily the same. The leadership that they have from the parents because of the generational pass-throughs are not the same. There's no question that they have a steep hill and a tough row to hoe. But it's not going to get better because you're out there cutting fire hoses that are trying to stop fires, burning down businesses that are family owned in their own community.
What Phil McGraw says here, what Dr. Phil says, is factually undeniable. In addition to issues of schools being different in different parts of the country, in addition to issues of class, in addition to issues of leadership, and as he points out, generational pass-throughs, we know from countless studies that class mobility basically doesn't exist. Before you email me saying, David, look at all of these athletes who have done really well. Look at all of these anecdotal instances of poor people who are now uber rich. Let's talk about broad strokes and the community as a whole. Statistically, if you're born into poverty, you are not very likely to get out of poverty. And if you're born very rich, you're very likely to continue being very rich. Class mobility and the caricature of the American dream, more or less, are not something we can count on in the U.S. anymore. And I applaud Dr. Phil telling it absolutely like it is.
He is speaking the truth here. Of course, you can find thousands of examples of upward mobility and people hitting it big. But, I'll find you millions and millions of examples of the contrary.
Dr. Phil was escorted out by security. He will not be back on Fox News. No, I'm kidding. We don't know that. But I love it when someone goes on Fox News and for whatever reason, they expect the conversation to go in a certain way. And then all of a sudden you've got a truth teller like Dr. Phil who says, actually, this is the reality. And sometimes it seems like they're so unprepared for the guests not agreeing that they seem almost like a bomb went off and they're just stunned, like, what just happened? And they don't even know what to say.
Yeah, but I think they're always caught off guard when this happens, and they never really respond in the way a journalist would. But I think when guests disagree with the Fox News hosts, they're being too cordial, they're being too nice, they're framing it in a very nice way. Well, like, I'm not sure I agree with that. They need to come out and say, no, you're wrong. You have no idea what you're talking about. And, make the viewers understand.
Yeah, the few guests that have done that have actually not been invited back, and their mics were cut half the time as well. So we know that Fox does not like that, but I agree with you. I would love to see more of it. Tomorrow, biggest announcement in the history of the David Pakman Show. So far, we have ruled out Lewis and I are not announcing our homosexuality. We are not in a relationship with each other. Lewis has not accidentally had a kid, and the announcement is not that things worked out and he loves the kid, as lovely as and heartwarming as that may be. The announcement is not that we're joining TYT Network, as someone suggested. We were actually we were the first channel to join TYT Network years ago, but we've since gone off on our own to build our brand independently. I'm trying to think what other suggestions there were or predictions. Those are the only ones I remember. It is none of those things, but you will only have to wait until tomorrow, the Friday show. The first segment tomorrow is all about the big announcement.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is funded directly by our audience through the David Pakman Show membership program, which you can sign up for at davidpakman.com/membership. Last day of the month, always a good day to sign up. I'll tell you that for sure. Today's new member of the day is Marty Gordon. Marty, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. You now get the bonus show, the commercial-free audio podcast, the commercial-free video show, access to our membership town halls, access to an archive of our shows going all the way back to 2005, and so much other great stuff. Takes just 1 minute to sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Great film recommendation today. Lewis actually suggested I watch this one. It's called Plastic Paradise, and it follows Angela Sun around the issue of plastic to some pretty remote places, including the Midway Atoll, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and so many other areas. A lot of people have some sense of what happens when plastic is thrown out, Lewis, and a lot of people have some sense of the lobbying around plastic, but this really digs in a very interesting way at what's going on with garbage and plastic.
Yes, it is a great documentary. I think it does a great job at highlighting how pervasive those plastic chemicals are. And it's certainly worth a watch.
And there's no question that plastics have allowed humans to do some great things. And I don't subscribe to we should not even have developed plastics. I recognize where we would be today, technologically, scientifically, if we had not developed plastics. But now that we are starting to get a grasp of the impact of the human race on the planet and on pollution and on trash, we should really be aware of what's going on with disposal of plastic, because we're actually starting to get a handle on the technology, and we would be able to mitigate the damage we're doing, Lewis.
We should certainly try, but it's difficult when companies like Coca-Cola are pumping out how many of these plastic bottles a day.
Yeah.
And in the documentary, they say, why are these companies not responsible for that plastic?
Plastic Paradise is the name of the documentary. Check it out on Netflix. Available elsewhere as well. Highly recommend it. Bernie Sanders is running for president. Lewis, he faces an uphill battle against Hillary Clinton because he is running as a Democrat, not as an independent. He believes that he can win by reaching out to the overworked and the underpaid Americans that want change, saying, quote, "I've been traveling around the country for the last year trying to ascertain whether there really is grassroots support in terms of people standing up and being prepared to take on the billionaire class. I believe that there is." Bernie Sanders, 73-year-old senator from Vermont, said Americans are disenchanted with the greed of corporate America, saying, "I believe they want a fundamental change so that government works for ordinary Americans and not just billionaires." Let's look at Bernie Sanders' political positions. This is super interesting, Lewis, because we now have a Democrat whose political views really are very different than not only just about every Republican, but many mainstream Democrats as well. Foreign policy: opposed to the Iraq War, opposed to getting bogged down in Afghanistan, says Middle Eastern countries should really be the ones dealing with ISIS, not the US, at least militarily. He supports using sanctions against Russia, and he also backs the idea of a deal to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. On the environment, he admits that human activity on Earth is impacting our climate. He supports strict measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. On same-sex marriage, obviously, he strongly supports national same-sex marriage, and he wants the Supreme Court, hopefully next month or in June, to make a broad ruling on it. With immigration, Bernie Sanders supported President Obama's plan from last year involving executive action to shield millions of undocumented immigrants for deportation, but he also has called for reining in the guest worker program because he says that it fuels youth unemployment. Healthcare, Bernie Sanders supports Medicare for all, single-payer healthcare system. I would love to hear Hillary Clinton's take on that. The economy. He is a demand-side stimulus via government spending guy. He wants to raise the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. He says $15 an hour is reasonable. He wants to break up the largest banks, bar CEOs from banks from serving on the Federal Reserve's regional boards of directors, and he vehemently opposes the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Let's not be confused, Lewis. These are popular opinions nationally when you actually do fair polls. If you ask people, hey, does the government have some responsibility and should they provide a basic level of health care to everybody, regardless of ability to pay, 2/3 to 3/4 of Americans say yes. But you barely ever have a viable presidential candidate who says that. These positions are popular nationally. I still don't think that Bernie Sanders has a shot, unfortunately.
It's sad. The trick is to get people to understand that these are your opinions and these are your beliefs, and they need to hear it. And that costs a lot of money, of course.
He will push the debate to the left, though.
He will, and that's a good thing. Yeah, I would like to think. Unfortunately, I agree with you. I don't think he can win. But I would like to think that Hillary might consider him for VP when presumably she wins the primary.
What did you say? That Hillary would consider Bernie for VP?
Yeah.
Can you imagine that? I mean, there is no way that a more corporatist, moderate Democrat. I mean, Bernie Sanders is actually progressive.
He is. And, I think it would be a balance, if anything. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm
Right.
saying I would like it to happen.
No, I would like it to happen too, of course.
It's not going to be Elizabeth Warren. It's not going to be, it would be nice.
Is this good for Democrats no matter what happens, in the sense that having Bernie Sanders on stage in the debates will make it so that Hillary Clinton is framed in relation to his populist ideals, and it might make her seem really conservative unless she adjusts her points of view to be more progressive? Wouldn't having someone like Bernie Sanders really be illuminating in terms of what it is that the Democratic Party should stand for?
That could be. But how will it affect the presidential race? I mean, is it, if Hillary's going to win anyway, is that really important?
Yeah, I don't know. And then you get into the Ralph Nader effect stuff, which is
Right.
although Ralph Nader was running as an independent, would having Bernie Sanders in some way hurt the ability of the Democratic candidate, whoever it ultimately is, their chances to win? Would they be hurt? I don't know. The last thought on this, I still maintain we will have a female president before we have a Jewish president. That doesn't necessarily mean Hillary versus Bernie, but I still maintain that we will have a female president before we have a Jewish president. Agree, disagree, Lewis?
A female president before a Jewish one? Yes, I agree. I do.
All right. Next, I will debate a libertarian, supposed libertarian, about very basic economic stuff that I thought everybody had already figured out. Not everybody has, though. That's next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Forbes editor John Tamny, also author of the new book Popular Economics: What the Rolling Stones, Downton Abbey, and LeBron James Can Teach You About Economics. You wrote this super interesting article about your opposition to Marco Rubio's tax plan. Marco Rubio, of course, Republican candidate in the 2016 Republican primaries. I agreed with so much of what you said, which is interesting because I don't agree with much that's published in Town Hall typically. But I didn't necessarily agree with some of the reasoning. So let's start at the beginning. What is it about Marco Rubio's tax plan that you don't like?
Well, because it has nothing to do with economic growth. And in my view, I'm a libertarian, but if Republicans aren't about growth, to me, they're about nothing. This is a tax plan that says we are going to subsidize ongoing childbirth so that we can continue to pay for the ongoing growth of government. I don't see the growth there. I just see two guys trying to subsidize bigger and bigger government.
So your problem is that the plan from Marco Rubio is growing government. I mean, if we were to say, here's the overarching disagreement you have, is that it's growing government.
Well, it's that, and then we're also talking about a plan that basically uses the tax code to socially engineer. And these guys, Rubio and Lee, bill themselves as conservatives. I don't see what's conservative about government or using the tax code to socially engineer society.
So talk about that, because this is a part, I'm glad you're mentioning this, because in the article you talk about, I'm guessing what you mean by penalizing the hard work of the successful is that the top tax rate would be reduced slightly, but not enough for you, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I don't see why Jeff Bezos, who has created something that allows me to order the world's plenty with a mouse. I don't see why Michael Dell, who has made it possible for me to own a computer for next to nothing that in the 1960s would have cost over $1 million. I don't see why they owe more in taxes than I do, just because they're worth many more billions than I am.
Well, let's explore that though. So question one, you don't have to tell me how much money you make, but if we were to talk about if we're to talk about quintiles, right, dividing into 5 quintiles the people's income, are you aware that the average effective tax rate that people are paying is essentially identical from the 60th percentile on up? Did you know that?
I've heard that argument that in fact that it's roughly, and you're saying in terms of a percentage that people pay of their income to the government.
Exactly. So in spite of the fact that we have a sort of ostensibly progressive tax code where the more you make, the more you pay as a percentage of your income, once you get to the 60th percentile, taking into consideration all taxes that are paid, the average is about 32% from 60 percentile on up.
Well, it's an interesting argument, and I would say what you're telling me is that government's taking way too much of everyone's income. Now, certainly what we're leaving out of this is, let's face it, it's the top 1% of earners, and I'm not one of them, who foot the bill for the vast majority of government. And I don't think that's a good idea. And I would add, I think it's a terrible idea if we're trying to lift the income and growth possibilities of those not in the 1%.
Okay, so then now that's really getting into the meat of what I want to discuss. In your op-ed, you say, Senators Rubio and Lee have feebly called for a reduction in the top tax rate from 39.6% to 35%. Lest we forget, there are no companies and no jobs without investment first. The rich, by definition, have the most disposable income to invest. As a self-proclaimed libertarian, I would imagine you would realize that business investment is tax deductible, and a higher rate on personal income would actually encourage business investment. And I'll give an example, and of course I'll allow you to either agree or disagree with me. If I'm 1% guy, right, and my top marginal tax rate is 39.6%, instead of 35% or 30% or 25%, I would want to invest that in a business because that expenditure is tax deductible and I'm saving 39% instead of the lower 35 or 30 or 25%. A higher top marginal tax rate encourages investment.
I'm not buying this argument simply because correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
the capital gains rate on investment, if you actually get a return, is 20%. And so tax deductible or not, what you seem to be encouraging or is a tax code being used to encourage investment or not. I don't want either. I want the government not having a role or decision in whether money is invested or not. And what I would say is, if we allow the rich to hold on to their wealth, whether they love business or not, odds are it's going to find its way to new businesses.
But that's empirically untrue. That's been widely debunked. If you have any data that suggests that the rich don't have a drastically higher marginal propensity to save than the poor, I would love to see it. There is not one legitimate study that suggests that. And a simple thought experiment, hold on a second. Well, hold on. Let me get the question out, and then you can take it whatever direction you want. The richer you are, the less likely you are to need that additional money. And it's been widely shown that the richer you are, the higher percentage of new income you are to save rather than invest. And lowering the top tax rate only encourages that activity.
Oh, well, thank you very much for saying that, because you just made my point beautifully. You've made the argument that I make to people all the time. So let's say I'm one of those much demonized 1%ers and I'm worth billions and I'm Mr. Scrooge. Okay, so maybe I'm kind of conservative with my money, so I'm going to keep it all in the bank or cash equivalent. If I do, are banks paying me interest on my wealth because they want to stare at it lovingly? No, they're lending it out to those who have immediate consumptive needs. They want to buy a car. They want to buy a house. They need tuition money for their kids. Or better yet, maybe they want a loan so they can start a business. If I am holding on to my wealth, it is by definition being redistributed to people not nearly as wealthy as I am.
There's a couple problems with that argument. Number one is that while you're not wrong that the money that a 1%er saves, socks away, is going to be then turned into loans which banks make, when we look at the economic multiplier of spending $1 here versus $1 there versus $1 there, we know that money sent through the banking system, the way you describe, has one of the smallest economic multipliers. In some cases, in fact, with some hedge fund and equity fund activity, the way you're describing, it has a negative multiplier effect. So while what you're saying is not inaccurate, Every serious economic study shows that if a rich person actually spends or invests that money in real business, the stimulative effect is orders of magnitude greater than saying, I'll save it and banks will lend that money. And all you're really doing when you do that is just enriching banks by allowing them to collect interest.
Okay, great. And look, and I'll be the first to tell you, I'm not against banks, but I thought it was a very big mistake that we bailed out the banks. But again, you're making my point for me.
I don't think I am.
I constantly hear about how the rich are really greedy and everything.
I've not said that. Let's focus on what you and I have said.
That's generally what I often hear. Okay, so you're right. Having worked in private wealth, I know this intimately, they generally don't want to keep it in cash or cash equivalents. All I'm saying in bringing up the banks is that if they do that, their wealth is by definition being lent out to others, in many instances not nearly as wealthy as they are. To say otherwise, to say that banks sit on money is to engage in falsehood.
But who has said that? Because my argument doesn't include the assertion that banks sit on money.
I can say that most don't want to do that. In fact, they want to invest in the stock market, in which case we're getting a better multiple. They're investing in more innovative companies. But even more than that, many of them want to invest in venture capital funds.
The problem is that even though you may know people that want to do that, there are broad economic analyses that tell us that the marginal propensity to save for a one percenter is so much higher than for someone who is lower on the income brackets, and that the stimulative effect of putting that money in the hands of those with a higher marginal propensity to spend is orders of magnitude higher than just socking that money away in stocks. So while you're not
Dave,
wrong...
How is it that we're having this conversation? Are we having it on Skype?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, well, how was Skype created? Did it just come out of thin air, or is it a result of savings?
Nobody is arguing that all savings is bad. The issue is when we're talking about tax policy as a point...
Tax policy. So you would prefer, you think it's more stimulative for the government to take more of the wealth held by the one percenters, and what would you do with it? Who would redistribute this wealth?
It's not an issue of redistributing the wealth. It's an issue of, hold on a second. You're making a bunch of different disjointed arguments, all based on faulty supply side nonsense.
I want to know why you think what you think.
What I think is based on the facts. And the fact is, hold on a second. Whoa, but hold on. You asked me a question and you're not letting me answer.
Okay, fine.
Your argument is that to stimulate investment, this is in black and white, it's in the Town Hall article, that to stimulate investment, the top tax rate should drop not from 39.6% to 35%, as Senator Rubio has suggested, but it should drop much more to stimulate investment. That's what you said in the article. Absolutely. Can we at least agree on that?
Absolutely, I said that.
Okay. What I'm saying is that it has been demonstrated beyond reproach that to create an incentive for investment, there needs to be, if I can not pay 39% by investing my money, or I can not pay 30% by investing my money, not paying 39% is a much more compelling reason to invest than not paying 30%. I mean, how could you deny that? It's just simple math.
How can I deny it? You keep bringing up demonstrated beyond reproach in studies that, of course, you can't produce, and I can't have access to them right now.
But let's forget. Let's just talk as two reasonable people. Hold on. Let me reframe it. You're making a fair point.
You can't get beyond. There are no companies and no jobs without investment first. I would rather leave the wealth created in society in the private sector.
Let's just do a simple thing. Hold on a second, John. Let's refocus. Let me just ask you a question. You have $100, right? I say to you, listen, if you keep that $100 at the end of the year, I'm going to take 40% of it, okay? Or I say, if you keep that $100 at the end of the year, I'm going to take 5% of it. The way to avoid me taking either amount is by investing the money in a business. Are you going to be more likely to invest to avoid losing the $40 or the $5?
It's entirely possible that I would be more likely not to invest, because I don't know about you, but I've worked a lot in the investment industry. Most investments fail.
Oh,
And so
John.
the idea that an investment is a one-way street is kind of fanciful. It's not a world that I'm familiar with.
But then you're making a different argument now. Now you're saying actually the government shouldn't incentivize investment because it's risky.
What does the government do right now? If I buy a New York City or a California municipal bond to fund government spending, I don't pay any tax on the income at all, federal or city. But if I have the temerity to take my wealth and invest in a future Google or Microsoft, well, if I get income on that investment, I'm going to pay a tax on that.
But it's a far smaller tax bill than paying it as income, right? You admit that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that's unfortunate. I do not like the idea that government taxes income at such a high rate. In my perfect world, they would tax capital gains at zero. I don't see why we would tax those who are providing capital to the businesses and jobs of the future. It is a mystery to me.
All right. Well, that is certainly a different conversation, which we can have. We've been speaking with John Tamny. The book, of course, is Popular Economics, What the Rolling Stones, Downton Abbey, and LeBron James Can Teach You About Economics, released today. I hope there's some demand-side economics in that book. Otherwise, it's going to be a tough one to get through, John. But I appreciate you being on, and even though we didn't agree on much, it's an interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I've told you a bunch of stories of kind of shooting the messenger when it comes to security issues and vulnerabilities. This is where someone figures out that some platform or company or website has a security vulnerability, and they are punished for pointing it out. One example is Charlie Miller, right, who found a big vulnerability in iOS, which is the mobile Apple operating system. It would have allowed malicious software. It did allow malicious software to be installed on iOS devices, and Apple responded by taking away Charlie Miller's developer's license. There was a security professional who found a really big and pretty obvious bug in the website of an Australian investment fund called First State Superannuation. And the company fixed the security glitch, but they also sent the police to interrogate the researcher, Patrick Webster. They sent a letter to customers where they suggested that Webster created the security flaw himself rather than their own programming. And then there was a student who found that his university was revealing names, social security numbers, and GPAs, who was not expelled, but apparently the school came very close to expelling him. The school accused him of breaking a university computer use policy that prohibits unauthorized people from accessing confidential files that may have been inadvertently placed in a publicly accessible location, saying, hey, if we mess up and put files in a public spot, you are breaking our rule if you just stumble upon those files, right? Even though it's our mistake, we made the mistake. Now the Electronic Frontier Foundation is involved in defending a security intelligence expert who tweeted from aboard a United Airlines flight about how easy it is to hack into the flight's Wi-Fi and access some of the flight's communications. I recently was on United. I used the Wi-Fi, and so was Chris Roberts, who tweets under the handle SidDragon1. He tweeted, quote, "Find myself on a 737-800. Let's see, Box IFE, ISE, SATCOM. Shall we start playing with ICAS messages? Pass oxygen on, anyone?" So what he's referring to is a plane system called ICAS, which is the Engine Indicating and Crew Alerting System. It's an integrated system that modern aircraft have to provide the crew with aircraft engine information, other crew announcements, etc. And what was made clear by Roberts is that he could put messages up in that system. The plane lands. Roberts is scooped up by the FBI, questioned for hours, had his encrypted computer, tablet, and hard drives taken, no warrant for any of this, and he told Forbes that he was disconcerted by the actions of U.S. law enforcement. Quote, Feds have known about issues in plane for years. Why are they hot now? I'm a researcher. That's what I do. I don't go out to harm or hurt. Why pick on researchers? He was heading back out from the airport to San Francisco. He was again detained just a couple of days later, Lewis, and ultimately missed his flight after being told that he is not allowed to fly on United anymore. This should be seen as useful for the public, which now knows, somewhat certainly, that United Airlines would much rather attempt to achieve security through obscurity, right? Not letting people say that there's a problem with their aircraft security, rather than seeing someone like Roberts as, oh, he's alerting us to something. We should really fix that.
When it comes to government-related things, this is always what happens. When it comes to certain companies, this is usually what happens. On the other hand, you have companies who I think are run by competent people who, in a situation like this, might say, hey, that is great. Here's a reward, or here's a job for you.
Yeah, I'm hoping that there are lots of these instances we never hear about because the company handles it in that way instead of in this horrible way of shoot the messenger.
It does happen, and I've heard a few stories like that. It's certainly a much more interesting. It's a more interesting story when you're reading something like this. But we do have companies on both sides of the spectrum. Unfortunately, I think in most instances, this is what happens because those companies feel that they need to save face. They're humiliated. They want to make an example. But it's incompetence, if you ask me, clearly.
Sickening media consolidation is continuing. This story is from Western Massachusetts, where the David Pakman Show originally launched almost 10 years ago. There's a new brand name and a new modern set, which are being touted as the advantages to CBS, ABC, and Fox's local affiliates, all consolidating into the same company. Meredith Corporation, which has owned the Western Massachusetts CBS affiliate since 2003, purchased the ABC affiliate from Gormley Broadcasting for about $54 million 6 months ago. And now there is going to be a new entity called Western Mass News, which will be the media partner not only of those three stations, but also of The Republican, which is one of the bigger local papers, and of MassLive.com, which is a news website connected to The Republican. All three, Lewis, CBS, Fox, and ABC, those three news stations, local news stations, are now the exact same company. And the FCC is expected to approve this over the summer. This is going to even further narrow the spectrum of news and opinions in that market. And this is an example at the local level of something that is going on. We talk about national media consolidation, right? These huge conglomerates. What about when your CBS, ABC, and Fox affiliates in your local area are all the exact same company, Lewis?
Yeah, I suppose, it's not just that they're, I don't really know anything about Meredith Corp, but now, of course, they are going to have influence over what happens on the only news channel, local news channel. Before, at least you had three other companies.
Well, you still have the NBC affiliate.
Okay, you still have the NBC affiliate, but, it's a scary thing. And it's not too different at the national level, right? I mean, you have how many major networks? There's not much to choose from. I mean, is it really going to have a huge impact on what people learn about what's happening locally in
Well,
Western
a friend of
Mass?
mine sent me an email. They were like, David, this is not a big deal. All of those stations already report the exact same thing. 8 hours after it happens, there's this thing called the internet, which has made them completely non-essential. The half-hour local newscast, which is the 30% weather anyway, and then another 30% national stories that are hours old, and then 40% local news, if that. So yeah, I do understand that. And if you were ever wondering why your local news stations run the same stories, a lot of local news stations just don't produce their own content. If you look nationally, 1 in 4 local news stations produce no local content. They rely entirely on national content and shared local content. It's just a horrible, horrible area of corporate media. These local stations are increasingly irrelevant, but also just towing the standard corporate news line.
but because they are increasingly irrelevant, they've been suffering for a while across the country. Local news stations have, and so I think this type of thing was probably inevitable. Unfortunately,
Our voicemail number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's take a listen.
Hey, David. I got a question for you. I hear you lobbying for these driverless cars a lot, and I think you make some good points. But have you considered that they may be vulnerable to hackers, and that's sort of something that you'll never really be able to phase out entirely? Couldn't that pose more potential risk to a lot more people than the risk we deal with now?
Yeah, this has been asked about every new technology. That new technology is susceptible to hacking. And if that happens, we could be way worse off than if the technology was never invented. That has never held back the eventual progress of technology. So yeah, I recognize that it is a risk, and I am confident that the people who are developing the technologies are going to create safeguards. On the bonus show, the MTA here in New York City bans all political advertisements. FLACA is on the rise in Florida, and the Vatican gets tough on climate change. That's the bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership. Big announcement tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.